We resume. This time we're going to talk about another way to keep your paper white or to preserve certain areas from paint. It's called masking fluid. Masking fluid is a thick gel-like or glue-like substance that you basically can put on with either a paintbrush or certain other tools that you can get to create it. Some of it also comes in pens already, which can make it easier to do. Usually they come in a bottle, though, for example, like this, like the Daniel Smith's masking fluid, and you apply it. You must let it dry very carefully, and if you don't let it dry very carefully, it will sometimes rip your paper, or it will mix with the paint, which creates a huge mess. Basically, what you do is you put it on your paper, you let it dry completely, then you paint over it, and you let your paint dry, and let your paint dry completely, and then when you're sure everything is dry, you come along and you rub off, and voila, you now have an area that was saved from paint, made and completely is now back to white. So that is one method of preserving some paper. Do be careful with your brushes though, because this stuff will ruin your brushes. So don't use your nice brushes on it. You can use either a raggedy brush that you're ready to throw away. You can also put a little bit of dishwashing liquid or dishwashing soap on the bristles of your brush before you put it in the masking fluid. That kind of coats the bristles and it keeps them from getting too sticky and getting too ruined. But do be careful not to use your best brushes with it. And also wash carefully afterwards. It will dry basically hard, just like it does on the paper. Another way of reserving certain areas is tape. Make sure you use an appropriate tape, either a painter's tape, or this is called special kind of tape. I think it's from Japan called washi tape, W-A-S-H-I, tape that comes in a lot of pretty colors. But you want to make sure you have a tape that's going to pull off without ripping your paper. But if you want a straight line, such as a horizon line, this is a good way because everything underneath the tape won't get painted, and you can create a very sharp, very clean line above it. You can also use tape and cut it up into small little pieces if you want to try to make a more complicated stiff shape. But as I mentioned before, I'm a little too impatient to do that most of the time. For that, often masking fluid will work better. But if you'll notice, it'll peel off and you have a completely straight line. That allows you to keep things straight and perfect. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to talk about quality of your brushes. Brushes are extremely important. They help, of course, deliver the paint onto the paper. So a good quality brush, there are very different qualities of brushes when it comes to watercolor. There's everything from super cheap to extremely expensive. Usually the most expensive are made of animal hair, for example, either sable or squirrel are very common. They hold more water, usually than synthetic fibers, but there are also some very good synthetic brushes on the market. Personally, I'm an animal lover, so I try not to use animal products. But for example, Mimic, M-I-M-I-K, is one that is a new brand that's coming out that is supposed to have many of the same qualities as some of the higher level stuff. Your brushes vary a lot in terms of the amount of water that they hold. Specifically, the reason it's very important is it lets you know. We talked before about if you have too much water on your brush, you lose control. Or if you don't have enough water on your brush, sometimes you can't get the beautiful flowing effects that the watercolor is known for. But the most important thing is to be aware of how much water your brush holds, because you don't want to either use too little or too much water. So there are various different videos on what kind of brushes people like. But the most important thing is to get to know your brushes, because you want to know when you go to dip it in here. Some will come out with an incredible amount of water on here, and when you go to lay it on, you'll get a blob of water where you weren't intending to get it, and that can ruin your painting or create blooms or do things like that. Or the opposite, if it's not picking up enough pigment, then you're going to have to keep dipping your brush in it over and over again. So whatever kind of brushes you get, make sure you just practice with them and have an idea of how much water they hold. There are different kinds of sizes of brushes, all different from the tiniest to the largest. And there's also different shapes. There's square and there's round. I use the round majority of the time. That's my favorite brush by far. Of course, the bigger brushes are good for large areas, especially if you want to make a background, for example. There are brushes up to an inch thick. If you want to make very fine details, there are brushes that are just a sliver of an inch big and can sliver of an inch wide and can make very fine lines. The most important thing is to take first of all, know your brushes, like I said. Second of all, take good care of your brushes and don't use brushes that have become damaged. For example, let me show you. This is an example of a fairly new brush. If you can see it, all the bristles are together, all the bristles are the same length, and they have a good, there's no little outliers, none sticking out or anything like that. This is a good brush that's, again, very new. This brush, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a much older brush. I've used it sometimes to try and scrub out areas I don't like very much. And I don't know how well you can see it, but it has, instead of being all one size, some of the bristles have broken off and they're now all different sizes. So you have ragged little jagged edges poking out everywhere. And what happens, why that's a problem, is when you're going to try to drag paint along, instead of smoothly dragging it along, what you get is you get little areas or brushes that separate out and they can cause streaking in your paint. An example of when I tried to do it with a bad brush is it created all the streaks because all the little tiny bristles were going out in their own directions and going out like that. So that's why it's important to try to make sure your brushes are in good shape before you ruin a painting by doing something like that. Okay. There are many videos on how to care for your brushes as well. Thank you.